Hello and welcome, Kentucky RAs. It's time for our March Royal Ambassador video lesson and Campcraft lesson. This month, I want to start with the Campcraft lesson part and talk with you about what to do when you get lost. We're experiencing warmer weather and we're getting more sunshine and more rain as well. Spring is arriving, and if you're like me, you want to get outside more. And as RA groups get out in the woods hiking and camping, it's important for RAs to know what to do if they get separated from their group, if they get lost while out hiking in the woods. And discussing this and learning this information is part of the map and compass skill area for the Discover 2 patch. And if you want to look in the manual, we have our Campcraft manual, and you can find more information about this on page 135 in the manual. So let's talk first about what to do when you get lost. Now, there's several things you need to know, but first of all, the best thing you can do is even before you head out to hike, and that's be well prepared when you head out on that hike, when you head out to go camping. And there's several things that it's important to take with you if you go out for a hike, and you want to have these with you. It will make dealing with getting lost a little bit easier. So first of all, when you go out, and these are things you want to take with you anytime you go out hiking, really, and have on hand. So first of all, you want to have a bottle of water. I've got here a bottle that I use frequently when I go hiking. It's full of water, and hanging from it's my little carrier. If I'm just taking a short walk, in a neighborhood park, and I don't really not getting out in the woods, I can just hang that from my belt and carry it with me that way. But I can also put it in the sleeve of a backpack, and it fits quite well. So you want some water. You want to take a personal first aid kit. I've got one here. I did a video last year on April 8th that talked about how to put together one of those personal first aid kits, and you want to have one of those on hand. If you don't have a whistle in your first aid kit, then you want to bring a whistle with you, and I'll mention why in just a minute. It's always a great idea when you're out in the woods to have a compass with you to use in case you get lost. I always carry my pocket knife. That's a good tool to have with you when you're out hiking. It's not a bad idea to have a few matches or a small lighter with you, and you'll want to put those in some type of the matches, especially put that in some type of waterproof container. Or you can seal them in wax, and maybe we'll do a video on that soon. Is you can take matches and you can dip the ends of them in wax, and that'll waterproof them. But then when you're ready to use them and you scratch them against that hard surface, it scratches that wax off, allowing you to strike that match. You want to have some kind of light jacket with you. Something that will not only serve as a wind barrier, but as a waterproof rain type jacket. So I have one here that folds up nice and neat, and I can carry in my backpack. It's a rain jacket, and I can also just wear it like a windbreaker as well. You want to have probably some kind of light snack with you when you go out hiking. I did a video back on May 6th of last year about how you can put together a real simple trail mix with peanuts and raisins and M&Ms, or you might take some granola bars or things like that with you. So it's a light snack. And then, of course, you'll have a small day pack that you want to carry all of these things in with you. So that's the first thing. You want to be prepared when you go out. So if something happens, you're prepared for that situation. So you're out hiking now, and you suddenly realize you've become separated from your group, or as you look around, you realize, wait a second, this trail that I'm on is not really marked in any way. Oftentimes people will hike along marked trails, but then they'll go off in other directions, and they're kind of called social use trails or common use trails or things like that. They have no markings on them at all, and they can take you in a different direction than what you were planning on going. And that can happen easily because sometimes they just break off and you don't realize you've even followed that trail until you realize you're not on the marked trail anymore. So let's say something like that happens. First thing you need to do is stop. There's a stump or a log nearby, or a rock you can sit on. Just stop and sit down. Stay calm. Pull your water bottle out. Get a drink of water. Make sure you're staying hydrated. And then once you've sat down and you start looking around, you need to start to think and to observe and try to determine where you are. And some things you can do is start thinking about what was it you could see or possibly hear in the last place you were that you recognized as I'm on a trail or I'm in the right place. Maybe you were near a creek that you were hiking alongside of, or you could hear the creek nearby at least. Or maybe there was an overlook where you could see off in the distance, or there was a blaze. If you remember, I did a video on hiking and trail markings, and there's blazes that marked trails will have, and maybe you could remember seeing one of those. So think about that. Last thing I remember seeing that I recognized and I felt like I'm in the right place, I'm on the right path. Where was that at? What did you see? What did you hear? And then you might try walking back in the direction that you were coming from, and to see if you can get back to a place where you recognize where you were. And if you do this, it's important to mark the direction you're going somehow. Maybe use some broken limbs, some broken sticks to mark where you were going, little piles of rocks to help you know the path you're taking. Maybe some cloth. If you have some little strips of cloth, you can hang those on branches of bushes or something like that. In some way, as you go back, you can kind of mark that so that if you need to, you can return to that place where you first realized that you weren't sure where you were at, okay? So you can go back, and you may get back and go, oh, here's the trail right here, and here's where I got off. And then you can continue on in the way you were supposed to be going. You can also go back in the direction you came from and say, you know what, this is not going where I want it to go, but I know if I go back in this direction, it will take me back to the trailhead. It'll take me back to where I started. You may want to try to get a better view of your surroundings. So if there's a hill nearby or a tree that you might could climb, and don't take any big risks because you don't want to injure yourself in trying to figure out where you're at. That makes the situation even more dangerous. But if there's a place you can go that's near where you're at, within sight, that you can go and get a better view around you, that can help you sometimes determine where you're at. And there again, if you're in one spot and you say, you know what, if I go right over there up this rise, maybe I can get a better view, then make sure you mark where you are at and mark how you got there so that you can return to that spot if you need to. Look for recognized landmarks. Oftentimes you can see a tower with electrical lines on it, some of those high power electrical lines, or maybe you can see a water tower, or maybe you can see a mountain ridge or a mountaintop that you're not hiking in that area, but it's close enough you can see it, and it can help you to kind of gauge where you're at. You might pull your compass out and get a bearing on where north is and south, and what direction you seem to be going, and does that seem right? When I set out, I was heading in a northern direction, but now I appear to be going south. What happened there? So use these methods to try to determine where you're at and where you got off the marked path. You also want to take some time while you're doing this to pray. Pray and ask God to give you comfort and peace in your heart. Pray that He will help you to think clearly about what you're seeing and where you've been, what you did to end up where you're at. Pray and ask God to help you return safely to your group or to the trailhead where you started. These are all things you can stop and pray about. And then you want to not only pray, but then kind of develop a plan. What am I going to try to do now? Now that I've kind of looked around, now that I've kind of gotten a bearing on where I'm at and what I think may have happened, what is your next steps going to be? Are you going to try going back in the direction and finding that trail you got off of, or are you gonna try to stay put and wait for help to come to you? In either of those cases, this is where the whistle can come in handy. 3 blasts on the whistle. That's a recognizable sound or signal for help in outdoor settings. You can shout 3 times, and shouting is fine too. But after a while, if you're out there for a while, you can get kind of hoarse, and that can drain you of your energy. It's a lot easier to blow a whistle 3 times than it is to shout 3 times, and a whistle carries the sound of a whistle carries real well also. And so you'll want to blow that whistle 3 times, 3 sharp, loud blasts 3 times on that whistle, and do that about every 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then listen as well to see if people are responding to what you're doing. And if you decide to stay put, there's an option as well, and this is where the matches or the little lighter come in handy. You might make a small, safe fire. Okay, so remember your fire making skills and don't start a fire in a dangerous place. Make sure you clear the area. Make sure there's nothing close that's gonna catch fire and spread. You might gather a few rocks and put around there. Make sure it's an area where the ground is hard and there's no growth, so that you're not damaging living plants that are in the area, and just make you a small safe fire. During the day, if it's a smoky fire, that's a little bit more noticeable, so you would put on there maybe some pieces of greener wood that would smoke more. But if it's at night, you want it to be nice and bright. If you're hitting into the evening time and you want it to be nice and bright, so put some good dry wood on there so that it burns nice and bright and strong without much smoke. If it gets to the point where you haven't nobody's come to you, you haven't been able to figure out where you're at, and you're going to stay put, and it's going to turn into evening, then you're going to start to want to think about, how can I provide a little bit of shelter for myself in case it starts raining, or as the weather begins to go down? How can I shield myself from the wind? So you might want to look at, how can I put together a lean-to shelter using some sticks and some limbs to at least provide a windbreak between a couple of trees, or if there is a overhang in rocks, a place where you can kind of get there and shield yourself. So you want to begin to think about that. And again, if the temperature goes down, you've got your windbreaker, your rain jacket. Put that on to conserve the warmth of your body. In a lot of little first aid kits, people will bring an emergency blanket. They're these kind of mylar pieces of material that can serve as a blanket, or a little bivy sack as well. Those can fold up pretty small, and you might have that with you in your emergency gear, and so you've got that on hand to help keep you warm. And so, but again, you want to be thinking about, if you're staying put, you want to be thinking about, how can I make my presence known in case people come near? Because if you're with a group, they're going to know that you're missing, and they're going to want to be looking for you. So they're going to be shouting for you as well. If you're out hiking by yourself, something else that you should do before you leave to go on that hike is let people know where you are. So you're going to tell people, hey, I'm going to go be hiking in this area on this trail. It's about a 5-mile hike. I should be done about this time and heading back home. And so that way people, your family, if it hits that time and gets past that time and they can't get in contact with you, they can know, hey, to tell the authorities, this is the area where my friend was, and or my family member was, and that's where we need to go and look for them. So these are all things you need to do if you get lost. So a word to help you remember these things is the word stop. The S stands for stop. So don't keep going further and get further lost. Stop. The T stands for to think. Like we talked about, think about your surroundings. Think about things that you recognized when you were still on the trail. Think about what the trail markers are. Think about, what your compass can show you. Observe, that's a part of that as well. So stop, think, observe, look for landmarks, check your compass bearings, things like that, and pray. So stop, think, observe, pray, and the pray is really pray and plan. 2 P's there to give you a plan for what you want to try to do in that situation. So these are some things you can do, and it's important for leaders to teach this to your boys. And if you're a young RA listening to this, these are things you need to think about and understand and have in mind. Discuss them with your parents, discuss them with your RA leaders, so that you'll remember them when you're out hiking in the woods. All right, so let's move on now to our lesson. In March, our RA lesson is the story of David and Goliath. It's found in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17. And I'm not going to read that for you. I'm not going to read that for you from the Bible. I'm going to read for you from our RA Leader magazine. On page 8 and 9, there's a nice summary paraphrase of that story and what happened with David. This comes from the time in David's life. He was the shepherd for the herds in his family. He was the youngest member of his family, and so that was his assigned responsibility. And the Israelites were at war at this time with the Philistines, and his brothers were off at war with the army. And his dad asked him to take some supplies, some food to his brothers, and also some supplies that could be shared with the rest of the soldiers, particularly the commanders. And so David headed off to where the battle was going on, bringing these supplies. And this is what happened when he got there. It says, the Philistines gathered an army to fight against Israel. King Saul and the army of Israel lined up to fight against the Philistines. Each army was camped on a hill with a valley between them. A mighty hero named Goliath came out of the Philistine camp. He was more than 9 feet tall. Every morning for 40 days, Goliath stood in the valley and shouted at the soldiers of Israel. This is what he would say: choose one of your men, have him come down and face me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we'll become your slaves. And he would also say, but if I kill your person, then you become our slaves. King Saul and his men were too afraid. None of them would step up and fight Goliath. Now one day, Jesse, that's David's father, Jesse asked David to take food to his brothers on the battlefield. David heard Goliath challenged the army and saw how afraid the Israelites were of him. David told King Saul, "Don't let anyone lose hope because of that Philistine. I'll go out and fight him." Now David had protected his father's sheep from lions and bears, and so he was prepared to fight. And he also trusted God would keep him safe. King Saul tried to give David his own armor, but it was too big and heavy for him because he was not used to it. Instead, David picked up his wooden staff and went down to the stream and picked up 5 smooth stones, and he took his sling in his hand, and he walked out to Goliath. Goliath saw David, and he made fun of him. He said, "Why are you coming out at me with sticks?" He compared David to just a stick. He says, "Do you think I am only a dog?" But David said to him, "You are coming to fight against me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. But I am coming against you in the name of the Lord, who rules over all." So David ran towards Goliath, and he slung a stone at Goliath and hit him in the forehead. Goliath fell face down, and David killed him. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned around and they ran away. You notice David didn't say he was afraid of Goliath. Oftentimes when we think about courage, and courage is our virtue for the month of March, people think, well, if you're courageous, it means you're not afraid. But courage isn't based upon whether or not we are afraid. God is able to give us courage to do the right thing even when we're afraid. And that's what happened with David. God had prepared David to fight through his experience protecting his family's sheep from lions and bears. And David also trusted God to keep him safe. Those are the 2 reasons David gives for him being there, having courage, ready to fight Goliath. 1, he was prepared, and 2, he trusted God. And this is important for us to recognize both of these reasons. It's easy for us to think about the preparation part. You know, David was prepared. David knew how to fight lions and bears as he protected the sheep. But that's not what David trusted. David didn't trust his preparation. He trusted God. And God did take care of him. And God used the skills David had, the sling throwing, that he had developed as a shepherd. God used those skills to help give David the victory. God didn't use David wearing Saul's armor and trying to use Saul's sword. He used David as he was and as he was prepared. And so he used him that way to face Goliath with the weapons he had of a staff and sling and stone. When you think about courage and you think about needing to have courage in the challenging situations that we face throughout life, the things that can cause us to be afraid, we need to remember all of our experience leading up to that. God is preparing us. Like I was talking about when it comes to being lost, the first thing you do is what you do before you even go on the hike, and you make sure you're prepared. You make sure you have the first aid kit. You make sure you have your compass and your whistle and things like that. You make sure you're prepared, but you trust God. You trust God to work in your life. You trust God to use the things that He's done to prepare you in that situation. And if we'll trust God, He gives us the courage, and He uses us, and He uses the skills He's given us to do His work. And this is true of our March missionary as well. Our March missionary, it's Jeremiah and his wife Rebecca Brinkman. Jeremiah is a church planter and a church planting catalyst in New York City. When Jeremiah went to New York, he was surprised by the great number and the great diversity of the people living in the city and how close they live to each other. And the truth is, there are more than 8 million people living in New York City, and they come from all around the world. There's hundreds of different languages spoken in New York City, hundreds of different cultures that the people observe in their lives. And a place like that with so many different people, so many different languages, so many different cultures, that can be a scary place. But God had given Jeremiah and his wife Rebecca the courage and the skills to plant the churches in the city. And he planted a number of churches. Let's read about him. This story comes from our RA World magazine. It's on page 14, and it says, when I grow up, Jeremiah says, I always wanted to be a missionary. My dream was to be a missionary pilot who would fly the airplane to deliver medical supplies, Bibles, or other supplies to missionaries in the remote parts of the world. But God had a different plan for Jeremiah. Jeremiah graduated from Bible college and seminary, and he realized that even though he loved to fly, God wanted him to be totally committed to serving the Lord. And so Jeremiah began working as a fireman and an EMT. And then it was time to follow the Lord to serve on the mission field with the International Mission Board in Asia. Jeremiah says this, I thought we had finally made it to the mission field and that the Lord would leave us there in Asia to serve him for a long time. However, after only a few years, the Lord brought us back to the United States. We were seeking the Lord as to what would be the next step. At this time, he says, I was asked to begin planting churches in New York. Jeremiah had never even visited New York when he went there to begin serving as a church planter. Jesus was leading them to serve as church planters, and they were unstoppable. They planted churches and helped others to plant churches, and today Jeremiah is a church planting catalyst for the entire city of New York. He helps plan new churches, helps church planters to engage in their communities, shares the hope of the gospel in the communities, encourages church planters, and helps to build partnerships for church planters. Jeremiah is also a volunteer disaster relief regional coordinator for the Metro New York City. He serves during difficult times. He plans and prepares to take care of people and meet their needs during disasters. So I want you to think about this. Jeremiah always wanted to be a missionary. And he talked about how his dream was to fly a plane and help missionaries in that way by bringing supplies, Bibles, medical supplies, things like that. But in the meantime, while he was, he got his seminary degree, his Bible degree, his seminary degree, he worked as a fireman and an EMT, emergency medical technician. And then he went overseas as a missionary for several years. And as we have heard and know, most of our missionaries overseas are working to help plant churches and to equip local people to plant churches in their areas. And then when he comes back, he gets asked to plant churches in New York City. And so he uses his experience in another country to plant churches in New York City where there's people from all around the world, from many different countries. So his experience working in another country and another culture is helping him, I'm sure, as he works planting churches and helping other church planters in New York City. He also works as the disaster relief volunteer regional coordinator. And I'm sure those skills he gained as a fireman and as a EMT, he uses those as he thinks about helping people during disaster situations. So he has lots of preparation, but he had to trust God to take him to this place where he had never been before. That could be a very scary place for someone who had not been in a city that large, with that many people, with that many languages and cultures, people living very close together. It took a lot of courage to do that. And so it took a lot of trust on Jeremiah and Rebecca's part to go to New York City and to serve in this kind of way. Jeremiah says this. He says, this is where Christians, talking about New York City, this is where Christians can help Be a friend to new people. Maybe these people will want to learn more about Jesus and choose to follow him. Everyone has a need to hear the good news about Jesus. So our church planner, our missionary who is a church planner, Jeremiah, and his wife, Rebecca Brinkman, they see the need for people to hear about Jesus. They need to hear the good news. And they have been called by God to go to New York City and to do that there through the planning of churches and the helping of other people to plant churches in that area. And God is using them in really neat ways to do that. So be sure to pray for Jeremiah and Rebecca and lift them up this month in the work that they're doing. And remember the example they set for us, how they are showing courage by trusting in God, and how God is using them and their experiences and skills to do great things for the kingdom of God there in New York City. All right, thanks for joining me for our video lesson this March. I hope you have a great month, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.